amigos, ¿cómo están? Bienvenidos a un nuevo video. Yo soy Mariana Botello y estamos hoy con Kathryn, autora de El Bosque Grimm. Estoy súper emocionada de tenerla aquí, estoy súper emocionada de tener esta entrevista y estoy súper emocionada de poderla acercar un poquito a ustedes. Yo sé que les encantan las entrevistas y pues esta es una súper oportunidad. Espero que la disfruten muchísimo y pues nada, sin más que decir, vamos con el video. Author of Bosque Grimm, Burning Glass, and Bone Grace series, Kathryn Purdie. How are you?
Hello, I'm doing very well. I love Mexico. Everyone's super friendly, and I just want to move here.
You want to move here?
I'd be happy.
Really?
I love the weather. I love the people. I love the food.
Which area have you liked more?
Just here. Well, like Mexico City. It's
Mexico
beautiful.
City.
I love the mountains. Okay. So I'm more of a mountains than like ocean girl.
Okay, so, that's
yeah.
great. Well, if you come to live here, we can.
You'll welcome me.
You'll be part of my book friends.
Yay. Perfect.
Great. And how did you first start writing?
So I didn't know I wanted to be a writer till I was 32 years old. But I'd written growing up. I'd wrote poetry and short stories, but I didn't see myself as a writer. Like it wasn't my identity.
Yeah.
I thought I was an actress, and that's what I did. For a long time, I studied acting and classical acting. And then I donated a kidney to my brother, and in the recovery from that, it was really difficult. I was happy to do it, but like it was very difficult with my physical and mental health afterwards.
Challenging.
That made me like dig deep and want to. And I think you go to art. You want to explore and create. At least artists do when you're dealing with something complex. I was at a time in my life when I had like 3 little kids and I couldn't go be in a play, but I wanted to explore my own stories, and so I started writing.
Wow! And how was that jump from writing to yourself? Because I imagine it started as for yourself, your
it was
own
very personal
piece of art, to get out everything you felt.
Yeah.
So how was that little jump from it's just for myself to I think I wanted to show it to everyone?
That was hard, because I think as artists there has to be some part of us that wants people to see it, right? Like I wanted my books to be published, but at the same time art has to be so authentic and personal and vulnerable that it can be hard to like open those doors. And the hardest thing, I think, if you talk to almost any author, the hardest thing is writing the second book. So you've usually already written the first book and then you sell it if you're lucky, like not the first book you've ever written, but the first one that sells. Then you have to write the second one. And that one, while you're writing it, you're starting to get reviews for your first book that's your baby going out into the world, and you're realizing everybody can see what I write, and you're trying not to like have that get in your head while you just try to get in your own like personal zone and write for yourself. It gets really complicated. I had a massive meltdown when I was writing my second book, but I figured out my balance with it.
And how did you deal with that, with the negative and positive reviews too? But I think mostly the negative are the most challenging. Yeah,
and even the positive ones get in your head because which sounds funny, but when you're in the middle of writing something and you're having a hard time, like, you have stages where like one day you're like, this is so amazing, I'm the best writer. And the next day you're like, this is terrible. This is the worst thing I've ever written. No one's gonna like this book. Yeah. And the next day you're like, I think it's maybe good again. Like you're doing this the whole time. So yeah, in the middle of like all of that, like, am I good? Am I not good? And then if you get even a positive review, those can get in your mind because it can be like, this is the best book I've ever read, blah, blah, blah. And then you're like, well, the one I'm writing right now is going to be terrible. You know what I mean? Like then you compare yourself to the good, like that you can't match up to what you've done before. So, I mean, it's still fun to like meet readers in person and hear what they say in person. Yeah. But I try to like avoid reading reviews or like watching someone like book talk a review too much. I want to, but like, especially when I'm writing a new book, I try to like stay away so I don't get into my own way, get in my head too much.
Yeah, you mentioned that the difficult part is writing the second book.
Yeah.
You have, all your books are series.
I know.
How do you decide that? Do you know since the beginning that it's going to be a series, or you get to the end and you need more pages? So
with every author, it's a little bit different. Some authors sell a book and they hope it will be a series, but the rest of the series hasn't been bought yet by the publisher, so they don't know. And so they have to write it so it's kind of finished, but kind of not. But for me, luckily, I've had all my books, when I've sold them, they've sold as a series.
Okay.
So what I intended for them, and I intended them for them all to be series, it was like realized. So yeah, I'm a plotter, so I always have like a plan of what's coming, and yeah.
What drew you to the idea of building fantasy worlds?
I'm always drawn to magic, and I think all of that really rooted for me when I was a little girl. I love mythology from all cultures. When I'd go to the library, go to the mythology section, I just grab the mythology books, like the ones that are just the myths. Like
the real, not the retells,
yeah.
The real stuff.
Because yeah, when I was little, I was like, that was just the fun stuff for me. And I don't even know what originally drew me to that. Like I just always loved magic. I think it's escapist, but it's also like exploring like a really exaggerated version of what real life is. It's like a safe way to test very scary ideas and like find empathy for characters that maybe in real life you'd have a harder time with. So it's really fun, but I think it can be really powerful too.
Is there a world you have imagined but you haven't written down yet?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and it's coming soon.
Yes. Right now, it's the book I want to write after the one I'm writing right now.
What's your process for developing characters in your stories? Do they come fully formed in your mind before writing, or you keep building them while writing, while advancing in story?
They don't come fully formed. They, like in the very, very beginning, sometimes it's just like, I feel like they have a question, or they're like struggling with something and they're trying to figure out how it works. Like for example, in this one, Hechicera de Huesos, before I even decided on the characters in this book, I just came across a myth, like folklore in French mythology, and I read this myth that was like, there are things called women in white, kind of like a vampire or a siren or whatever. In France, it's the basic folklore is if you're walking out at night and you cross a bridge, you come to a bridge and there's a beautiful woman in white on the bridge, and she asks you to dance. If you dance with her, she lets you cross the bridge. If you don't dance with her, she'll kill you.
Oh,
and that's like all there is to it. I was like, I read that and like, that's kind of like the supernatural creature, but there's not like really a story that goes with it. That's just like a being, like a vampire or something, you know? Yeah. And I was like, they just kill the men because they didn't dance with them, you know? And I was like, there has to be more than that. And I could not stop thinking about that folklore. Yeah. And so I invented this whole story around it. I wanted them to like think they had a justified reason for killing the men.
Okay.
So I built this whole society that they have to kill their soulmates to do their rite of passage. To ferry the dead, they've got to prove their loyalty to the gods. And so they have to do this terrible thing, but they think they're doing a great thing. And they're like, lucky you, man, I killed you, but I get to see you in the afterlife. But it's about her like finally understanding what that's like for other people. And it's about meeting her soulmate, but he wants to kill her and take vengeance. For that one, I was like trying to find the character that would fit the myth and the retelling I wanted to do, which they don't always work that way. You know what I mean? Like you try to like address the needs of the story through the characters, but then with all my plotting, once I start writing the story, the characters take over, and I usually have to like abandon some of the plotting I've done because they start coming alive.
And now regarding the Green Forest, where did the idea came from?
For this one, sometimes you just think about we just think about what have I always loved, what do I really love? And for me, it's mythology and fairy tales. So I love the dark fairy tales, and Grimm fairy tales are the dark ones. And so I thought, but I wanted them more grown up, more aged up. I wanted more romance in them, and I wanted them darker. And above all, I wanted a bunch of them collected, but told in one story, not short stories, like from one character's point of view. And I thought it would be cool to like explore how the fairy tales came to be, like their origin stories. So it's like my version of like what came before even the fairy tale.
And how do you balance traditional fantasy with your own unique ideas?
So I thought about that a lot when I was writing Bosque Grimm, because it has all these different fairy tales. So I tried to think of like, because I don't use every part of the fairy tale sometimes, or sometimes I think what is like the core thing. So I tried to keep those core elements, and then sometimes I tried to take those specific core elements and like twist them even further. You give your own twist to everything. I really like that. And now that you mentioned Clara, I guess there's a purpose behind making her with this, I don't want to say disability, but in English it's a disability, okay, with this disability of the short leg, which is real, like that happens. Yeah. So, but why did you wanted to include that in the character? Yeah, so I didn't say the term in the book because they probably wouldn't have used it in that time, but it's scoliosis. Yeah. And hers is caused because of her uneven legs. And I wrote that in because I have two daughters and they both have scoliosis. Oh, wow. And my daughter, she's now 25, but when she was in high school, that's when her scoliosis hurt the worst, probably because of how she was developing. She was growing. And so she actually had to wear a lift in her shoe to adjust her legs. So it's very real for me, and it was and you did my daughters.
Like also for them to see someone,
to see themselves in a story. And I've had a lot of people with scoliosis or just chronic pain or some kind of back problem or hip problem or whatever that have written to me and been like, wow, I've never seen a character, like a main character with this, and like it really meant a lot to me. So
I really like Clara having that condition, because I think that also makes her really human. Like being in the middle of the action and just like, and then my back was aching, and you as a reader already forgot that she had that, and she was still running, saving people. Like she was worried on other things, and you reader forget that, but she doesn't, she never. So I felt that makes her really human, really real, and I don't know, I really like Clara.
Yeah, and you know, everybody, no matter what they deal with in life, we have some kind of challenge, whether it's physical or mental health or whatever, and it's gonna make some task harder for us than it is for other people. And I think there's a way to relate that, no matter how you look at it, relate with that, no matter how you look at it.
Have you suffered writer's block?
Not in the way that you would think, not in like, I don't know what to write, because that's why I spend such a long time plotting. So I never have to be like, what comes next? But the times when I experience it are when I have veered away from my plot to follow the character, or when I'm not listening to the character and I'm trying to stick to my plot. And then it just doesn't feel right. And then I stop and I'm just like, it's just not working. And when it's not working or just doesn't feel authentic, I just can't force myself to continue. And then lots of times I just have to go back 2-3 chapters and find wherever I turned wrong and get back on the right path, whether that's going back to my original plot but it's usually just listening to the character.
And is there any writing advice that would have helped you when you started?
To not worry about being perfect and to finish. I had the hardest time finishing for a long time. Like when I first wrote a manuscript that was intended to be like a book, you know, like a full-length novel, I just kept rewriting the first chapter over and over and over again. And then I'd write like the first few chapters, and I kept like getting feedback and listening to people and then rewriting them over and over and over again. And it's valuable. That's valuable to learn how to write the beginning of a story really well and learn how to receive feedback. But the most important education you can have is just finishing, because finishing, you're like seeing something through, you're seeing how a whole story works, how to write a whole story. And if it's too daunting to think of how to like finish a novel, then like write short stories a lot, because then you get the reward of like, I finished, like that feeling, you know. But my perfectionism held me back from finishing for a few years. And,
years.
And I needed to just finish. And once I finished, I felt like I climbed Mount Everest. Like, I can do anything now. Even though it wasn't revised yet, it was finished, you know?
Last but not least, which book from another author would you recommend us all?
I know it's really popular and it's adult, but Circe by Madeline Miller. So good. And I'm also a mega fan of Holly Black and Cruel Prince. I mean, like the Cruel Prince came out in 2016, but she's still writing like spin-off books. And I'm obsessed.
Thank you so much. This was a really fun interview.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for listening. Everybody read my books, but just read. And if you're an aspiring writer, write, don't be afraid, make mistakes, just finish, just have fun. It should be fun. Don't worry about doing it right.
Y muchísimas gracias por ver este video hasta acá. Los quiero muchísimo. Espero que les haya gustado mucho esta entrevista, que hayan aprendido muchísimo. Lean, yo ya leí El Bosque de Grimm, me encantó, se lo súper recomiendo. Y bueno, este ya me lo llevo súper recomendado, que por lo que dijo ahorita está buenazo. Pues ya, muchísimas gracias por ver el video hasta acá. Los quiero muchísimo. Síganos en nuestras redes sociales. Bye.